My mom's dog, Punky, R.I.P., was a very sweet, loving dog. She was an ESA dog, but trained to be a service dog for PTSD before she lost her leg. I had never seen her get aggressive with anyone in the entire 12 years she lived. She never growled or nipped to anyone, and she had no sense of smell. So, she loved all animals and people, a real gentle giant among our little terriers at 60 pounds. What I'm getting at here is that her barking at someone and being aggressive was so wildly uncharacteristic that I only saw it once. I, 11-year-old female, was at home with my siblings, 2-year-old male and 6-year-old female. My then stepdad was at work, and my mom ran up to the gas station to grab a pack of cigarettes. It was only a mile or two away from us. For reference, we lived in a 2-bedroom trailer in the middle of the woods, on a dead-end road at the time, and you had to really make an effort to get down our road, find our house, navigate down a rickety driveway, and find the door. I'm sitting at the computer, having a grand time watching YouTube videos, when all of a sudden, all of our dogs, about 2 Boston Terriers and 1 Chihuahua, perk up, bark a few times, and start investigating down the hall. My siblings were napping in the bedroom at the end of the hall at the time, so I figured they just stirred and scared the dogs. But then, Punky sits up suddenly, stands up on the couch, and puffs her chest out. Her ears are perked up, her fur standing on end, her tail straight up, and then she barks. Loudly. I mean, the bark booms through the living room and echoes around, and all of a sudden, she lunges off the couch and goes tearing down the hallway. I'm already on edge because I don't think I've ever heard her bark. Ever. She's a Basenji mix, so her bark is more of a baying sound. But this was big, loud, alert. I stand up and go to look down the hallway, ready to fight off what I'm assuming is a shadow monster in the hall, based on how the dogs are acting. But then, I hear it. We didn't get visitors because of how weird our house was, location-wise. So, my 11-year-old mind had no clue what to do here. The only people who showed up were family, and they didn't knock, so I slowly walked towards the door. The knock drew the attention of the dogs, and they came running back down the hallway, all except for Punky. I felt better with our 3 yappy dogs in the room with me, even if they were all the size of New York sewer rats. I opened the door just a bit, and standing on our porch is the sketchiest man I think I'd ever seen. I can still picture him perfectly. He was a really thin, taller man with dark hair and a sunken face, bags under his eyes, and this half-managed hair, sort of like he just gave it a quick brush and then figured it was good enough. Everything about him seemed just a little too thin, a little too shallow, and his clothes were all off too. They were nice, but fake nice, like a clean, newer-looking t-shirt and new jeans, but he had what looked like a suit jacket on. All his clothes were dark too, despite the fact that it was summer in Texas, and the weather was definitely in the hundreds that day. He also had this plain, unlabeled bottle in his hand. It looked like the label had been covered up and taped over. I stare up at him in confusion because I definitely don't know this man, and I ask what he wants. He smiles at me in this way that's way too fake, like this exaggerated and forced grin, and He spoke in the same voice retail workers do.
Hey there, kiddo. I'm trying to sell this here carpet cleaner.
And he shakes the bottle at me.
Mind if I come in to show you how good it works?
Alarms are going off in my head because he just seems so off. Looking back with an adult perspective, the fact that he didn't ask if my parents were home is unnerving, because he probably knew they weren't, and that's why he was here in the first place. I should have told him to get off our property, that I'd have to go get my mom, something except what I did say, but I didn't. Instead, I just shook my head and said, "No, we don't have carpet."
Well, it works on other things.
And he took a big step towards the door and shook the bottle at me. I start to freak out and think to close the door, but the thing is, our front door didn't even have locks. Small town, hard to access home. We never needed a lock, so that's basically useless. I'm sure there's something very wrong about to happen, and I'm terrified as I think about what to do in the few seconds I have before it does, when all of a sudden, I hear it. Punky had crept up from the hallway, lowered towards the ground with her teeth bared and snarling like she was feral. She had slobber just dripping from her mouth. Her ears were down and she was ready to pounce. The guy hears it too, and as I look towards Punky, she tries to lunge past me, and I just barely catch her with my leg as she tries her hardest to duck past me and attack this guy. He freaks out and runs off the porch without another word, booking it down the driveway as I let Punky out along with the rest of the dogs, and they start chasing him. Our small dogs chase him down the driveway and stop about halfway, barking and jumping about. But Punky stops just on the porch and watches him with her ears perked, just staring in the distance until he disappears. I swear I saw someone join up with him running when he got onto the road. The second he disappeared, Punky's entire body language changed, and she went back to being the sweet dog I knew. No barking or growling, just lying around, mouth and throat covered in slobber. I realized my siblings were still down the hall and run to check on them, and when I get to the bedroom, my siblings were sleeping soundly still. But the bedroom window was wide open, the curtains pushed all to one side, and the items on the dresser in the front of the window all shoved around. Someone had tried to climb through the window, no doubt in my mind about it. From what I can gather, the bedroom window was visible from the couch where Punky was sleeping, so I think someone was trying to climb through the window before Punky went after them and scared them off, and the man at the door was meant to distract me. They definitely didn't expect Punky, a bigger dog, because most of the time she was with my mom inside while our small dogs were the ones that were seen in the public eye more often. I don't know what they intended to do, but after my mom got home, she took all of us to my aunt's house, and on our way there, we saw the men walking up someone else's driveway. Men, plural, because we watched a second one split off to wait by the road. So, to the two men apparently going door to door to sell their unlabeled carpet cleaner, I'd really rather not meet again. Before I start this story, I'd just like to let you all know that I'm predominantly a skeptic, or at least I was until this house. I actually rarely talk about the events that happened in there because I don't have any rational explanation. But that house has stuck with me well into adulthood. Back in 2009, me, my mom, and my stepdad moved into a really old, rustic, rural cottage in England. My father had passed away not too long before, and this was going to be a new start for us all. The house was an absolute bargain. It had 6 bedrooms, 2 very spacious living rooms, and a huge annex at the back that was essentially a second house. We couldn't work out why it was so cheap. We went for the viewing, and the family eventually told us that there was an elderly mother who had passed away there peacefully in the annex, and they just needed to get away from the feeling of her. That probably should have been the first red flag. We weren't put off, and we bought the house. From the off, it was unsettling. My parents didn't see it at first, but I was incredibly uncomfortable there. It was extremely unnerving and cold, and not to mention, it was isolated behind rows of trees and a very long driveway, so far from anyone else. It started on the first night. My room was the one at the end of the corridor, and if you came out of my room, on the right was a bathroom and a locked door that had led to the annex, the place where the elderly mother died. My parents slept a long way down the corridor in the last bedrooms, so I was quite isolated, and directly opposite my room were the stairs. The first night, it was freakishly cold. I pulled my blankets up to my head, but after my dad passed away, I had suffered from insomnia for years, so the cold and the anxieties of moving to a new house all added together with this into zero sleep, so I ended up laying awake for hours, just sort of staring around the room. My bedroom door was one of those old and mismatched wooden country house doors. Didn't quite reach the carpets, and after a few hours, I could hear the creaking of floorboards directly outside my room, and shadows that seemed even darker than the darkness of the hallway walking past my door. I presumed one of my parents had gotten up to use the restroom at first, but this went on, back and forth for several minutes, and it was fast, a very brisk walk. And not to mention, next to my door was the locked door to the annex. Anybody walking at that speed would have hit the door, but nothing. It freaked me out, and it had me dreading the next night. This kept happening every night for weeks, and I remember vividly one night I actually left my bedroom door open. Around the same time I heard the creaking, I turned around, and unmistakably there was a figure, blacker than black, walking forward and backwards in front of the door, just visible in the darkness of the hallway. I couldn't take my eyes off it the entire time it was there. It's safe to say I never slept with the door open again after that night. But this is where things start to get properly creepy. I'd been terrified of this shadow for weeks now. There was a really horrible feeling I had around it, like it was after me. And one night, as I was going downstairs for dinner, I had the same cold feeling, and for just a second, I froze in place in the dark hallway and looked to my right towards the annex door. And there, sure as anything, and without my sleepy eyes to blame it on, I saw the same black shadow walking directly at me at a high speed. I ran downstairs as quickly as I could and told my parents everything. They mostly laughed it off and didn't believe me and tried to reassure me that ghosts aren't real and there was no chance of anything about this old lady still being in the house. Now, a bit of backstory. This old lady was terrified of the previous owner's family dog, so much so that they had to install a pulley system in the house so she could pull a cord from her bedroom that would trigger an old bell to ring in the kitchen if she wanted anything. The whole system was still there when we moved in, and this night, the night after I told my parents, I was awoken around 2 a.m. by this bell in the kitchen, ringing loudly and on repeat, like it was being pulled firmly and constantly. I ran out into the corridor, and my parents were there too, equally as confused and concerned as I was. We all looked at each other with ever-increasing worry and ran downstairs into the kitchen to see what was going on. As soon as we entered the kitchen, it stopped. We ventured up into the annex to see what could have caused this, but nothing. No sign of anyone, and my God, I hated it here. It was even colder and more lifeless than the main part of the house, and I just felt like I needed to leave as soon as I could. My parents didn't quite believe that this was a ghost yet, but they were clearly less skeptical than before. From here, any activity became much more obvious. We, my parents included, started to hear knocking from the annex door next to my bedroom. Noises from downstairs that sounded like someone was down there, moving. Sometimes my fish tank light would flick on and off with an audible click and wake me up, and I would often wake up to my wardrobe doors being swung open with no breeze in sight. One night, I was sat reading alone in my room, and one of these wardrobe doors opened by itself, wide and with relative force. I got up cautiously, closed it, and ran downstairs to see my parents. When I came up around 15 minutes later, every single cupboard door, around a dozen of them, were open as wide as they would go. Lots more went on too. Taps turning themselves on became a particularly regular occurrence, and one night, I awoke to the sound of my cupboard door opening again and saw droplets of water running from the bathroom next to the annex door all the way to a few feet from my bed, with no droplets out again. I was terrified. It was around 6 months after all of this started that we eventually moved out. My grandma had begun to grow unwell and couldn't care for herself anymore, and she moved in with us. From the beginning, she hated the house. My grandma was so incredibly sweet and calm, and I've never seen her distressed like she was when she was there. And on one night in particular, when I was sat downstairs in the kitchen with her, she took my hand, pointed directly towards the annex, and said, "Don't you go in there. I don't like it in there." It's safe to say, this scared the crap out of me. On the last night we all spent together in that house, I was awoken by my mom screaming. Clear as day, she said, she felt 2 hands firmly grab her ankles over the bedsheets and pull her down the bed just a few inches, and right then and there she asked to leave. We went to stay in our old house for a while, but because of size, my stepdad, the biggest skeptic among us, stayed in Lilac Cottage for a few more months. He's still quiet to this day about that house. He hates talking about it, but even he admits that there was something incredibly wrong there. And without much warning, he put the house up for sale, selling it so desperately that he lost almost a quarter of the price he paid for it. He's never told us why. I've promised myself that one day I'll reach out to the current owners of that house and see if they have also experienced anything, but I haven't just yet. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. All names in this story have been changed for privacy. For some context, I live in a major city and currently don't do a lot of driving due to the ongoing issues with my car. Plus, the pandemic has made me turn to more delivery apps in general. So, the other day around 1 p.m., I decided to order some lunch after doing a lot of cleaning. I placed the Ubereats order and found something to watch while I waited for the food. Within a minute, a driver accepted the order, and I noticed right away that the driver, Anthony, was on a bike, didn't have a profile picture, or any deliveries on record. At first, I wasn't alarmed at all. I was almost amused, like, oh wow, I guess I'm this person's first ever customer. But then, a full 30 minutes passes with no driver movement on the app, and at this point, I think maybe something is glitching out, or the driver is stuck. I contact support via the chat option, and they end up assigning a new driver because they couldn't reach the first one. Odd, but whatever. Now is when it starts getting a little weirder. The new driver assigned is in the exact same spot as the original driver. They are also on a bike, and have no profile picture, and have no prior deliveries as well, and this driver's name was Lori. I let another 20 minutes pass with no driver movement before I messaged them myself and say, "Hi there, are there any issues with the order?" The app shows that the driver saw the message, but no response. All this time, I'm checking to see if Ubereats is maybe experiencing issues. None that I could find. And at this point, while I'm definitely weirded out, I'm mostly just hungry. So I contact support again to request some assistance. They reassign the driver again and apologize for the inconvenience. Same deal. They also tried to contact the driver with no response. Finally, the third driver assigned is the exact same scenario. Same spot, on a bike, no profile picture, no prior deliveries. Only this time, the name is Robert. And before I can react and go about canceling the order, because at this point, I'm just tired of dealing with this, he suddenly has my food and immediately messages me the following.
Hello, have your food. What's your phone number?
And I respond right away with, I'm not super comfortable giving my phone number out when you can just message me here. And he responded again with,
What's your number? Be there in 10. How old are you?
And at this point, the alarm bells are going off, and I contact support immediately to have the order canceled and get further assistance. I get connected to Uber's safety team, who informs me that the order has been canceled. I'll be refunded and started taking down the details of the strange interactions. As I'm giving the woman on the phone the info she needs, I'm starting to calm down, thinking this was just some creep or something. And that's when I hear a man's voice at the front door.
Miss Metal Gear 42069, I have your food.
And I can't even describe the chill that went down my spine because of the way that he said it. Making things even worse, the Uber safety woman on the phone with me heard him as well and says, "Is that him? We canceled the order." I poked my head around the door. Main heavy door was open. Metal screen door was closed and locked, but allowed us to see each other, to get a good look at him. And when he saw me on the phone, he went from smiling to looking furious. He suddenly got right up against the door and kept asking who I was on the phone with. And at this point, I've started asking him to please leave because he was making me uncomfortable, and he's getting more and more angry, and at this point, starts pounding on my door and grabbing at the doorknob while shouting to be let in. The woman on the phone is asking if I'm okay. The man is still shouting, so basically, I'm in full meltdown mode at this point, and hurriedly closed the heavy door to lock it. The man is becoming borderline belligerent as he kicks my door, and the woman tells me to call the police. He ended up walking away from my house about a minute after that and back up to the sidewalk. And for a moment, I thought he had effed off, so I finished up my conversation with the Uber safety woman so she could submit the report. Once she submitted it, I called the police and told them exactly what happened. They weren't incredibly helpful at first, since he didn't actually break in or put his hands on me, and they told me if he came back to call again, and they would send an officer out. I did end up having to call them again and give a full report, plus description of the man, since he didn't end up leaving right away. He stayed in the neighborhood for almost 20 minutes. According to one of my neighbors, after she heard the yelling, she saw the man I described walk back up from my house to the sidewalk and hop into a truck with another man in the passenger seat, and they apparently just sat there, staring at people walking by and being incredibly sketchy. And that's when she walked back towards my house and asked me what had happened. Luckily, she was able to give myself and the cops a full description of the vehicle and the other man as well. So, basically, this was a very bizarre and uncomfortable experience, and I wanted to share it to maybe see if anyone else has ever had an experience like this, because honestly, I'm still pretty shaken up and will be avoiding delivery apps for quite a while. So, strange Ubereats driver who asked me for my personal info and then proceeded to try and break in. Please, let's not meet. I recently shared this story for the first time in a True Scary Stories group on Facebook. I got a lot of feedback from people who lived in the same town I did when this event happened. It felt good to finally share my experience. Shortly after posting, a woman contacted me and physically threatened me and my family if I wrote about him again. She believes him innocent, etc. It spooked me. I took my story down. I don't need weirdos like her in my life. I've since done some thinking about this and wanted to post my story again somewhere anonymously. It's my experience, and I'm not going to let some crazy child killer dater bitch scare me. So, here it is. I originally thought this incident happened in January of 1984. I now realize it was probably later in 1983. I was 8 years old and lived in Aurora, Colorado, a suburb southeast of Denver, Colorado. We lived in a brand new subdivision, and I loved it. Our house was busy. I had 3 older sisters, an older brother, and a grandmother, and my mom living in our house all at the same time. My 10-year-old sister and I shared a bedroom on the main floor. Our house was a ranch style. I loved this room. My twin bed was pushed up against the wall, and I had a window that faced to our backyard. I liked to push the curtains aside at night and perch my elbows on the windowsill and look outside. The window was elevated, but not so high that I couldn't see into the yard easily. My older sisters shared the room next to us, and my grandmother was in a large room across a small hallway from us. My mother had a finished bedroom all the way downstairs in the basement. My brother had the rest of the basement. He was 16 years old at the time and had a lot of friends that were always coming and going. I remember our house always being full of guests. We had a really cold spell hit us that week. It was super icy out, and my sister and I had been playing in the backyard. Our backyard had not yet been enclosed with a fence. We had these circular snow sleds that we would stand on and glide across the slick parts of the grass. We weren't good at putting our outdoor toys away, and had left them strewn across the lawn. That night, something woke me up out of a sound sleep. I thought about getting up and going downstairs to sleep with my mother. I did this from time to time as she and I were really close. Then I heard a noise outside my window. It It sounded like someone was slowly walking across the snow in the backyard. I could hear the frozen grass crunching underneath their feet. I then heard someone say,
"Shit."
or another explicit word, and something clink. I perched up out of bed and moved my curtain aside and looked out the window. I think I originally thought I would see my brother or one of his friends out there. He often came in late at night, past curfew, and usually snuck through the backyard into the open basement window. I remember thinking that he shouldn't be doing this on a school night, and I was going to tell my mother in the morning that he woke me up. It wasn't my brother. I saw a young man, probably in his early 20s, that I didn't recognize. I made eye contact with him and then quickly scanned the rest of the yard for my brother. I didn't see him anywhere. I was going to move away from the window, but the man's eyes were glued on mine, and he started walking towards my gaze. I froze. I couldn't move. He came as close as he could to the glass. He smiled at me. It was an eerie smile. It was a, "Oh look, you caught me doing something I shouldn't be doing," kind of smile. I remember he had crystal blue eyes, almost gray. Something about his expression was not right. It took me a few seconds to realize I was feeling fear. He was not a friend of my brother's, nor supposed to be in our backyard at that time of night. I panicked and jumped off my bed and quickly ran downstairs to tell my mother. Once I got to the basement, I saw that my brother was sound asleep in his bed as well. This scared me more as I knew now for sure that this man in our yard was most likely not a friend of my brother's. My mom calmed me down, came upstairs, and turned the light on outside and looked in the yard from the sliding glass door windows. She didn't see anyone. I remember her not making a big deal out of it, and I ended up sleeping in the basement bedroom with her for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep well. I wondered why that man was in our yard and where he went. I remember feeling scared he might come back. I don't know the exact timeline, but I am guessing it was a few weeks later that a family a few streets over from us was murdered in the middle of the night by an intruder with a hammer and a knife. The father, mother, and 7-year-old daughter were killed, and a 3-year-old daughter was left for dead, but miraculously survived. This crime sent our entire community over edge. The police did not seem to know who had done this horrible thing or why. All we knew was that the hammer killer probably chose their house at random, came in through an open garage door or something. No one in my family mentioned to me the man I saw in our yard again. I asked my mother about it years later, and she tensed up. The hammer killer case went cold, and the community moved on, as people do. I moved further south, to a different side of Denver. I never forgot that man in my yard, though, and always felt he might have been the same man who murdered that family. As years went by, more information came out, and they linked the murder of the family to a vicious murder of a woman in another community, Lakewood, as well. They also linked him to a savage attack on a couple and a flight attendant in Aurora as well through DNA. He was a serial predator, and he was active in our community that entire time. Fast forward to 2019, and I'm watching the news. I can't believe it. They have solved the cold case of that family's murder from 1984, as well as the other attacks. They flash the picture of the suspect across the screen, and my heart stops. It's him. It's the man I saw as a child. I have that face saved in my memory because he spooked me so badly. I said something about it to my brother, and he shrugged it off. I mentioned it to some friends, and they said it was creepy, but there was no way that I could have remembered something like that. I thought they might be right, until the news also showed some photos of the suspect when he was younger, and likely committed the murders. That is exactly the man I saw. I know it. It's changed the way I think about things. It's changed the gratitude I feel for life. What if he hadn't tripped on our sleds in the yard and somehow made his way into my house? My sisters and I could have been the ones on the news that night. When my son was 2 years old, he started acting as if he was interacting with something or someone that his father and I could never see, like throwing toys down the hallway and then running and murmuring words. When I asked what he was doing, he always told me that he was giving toys to the boy for him to play with. There was never anybody there, but it was always icy cold down that hallway and leading into the garage. I'd ask him what the boy's name was, and he would tell me Don was his name. I asked what the boy was doing. Waiting for his mom to pick him up, he would always reply. We put it down to an imaginary friend and nothing more. Harmless, we thought, until he started waking up in the middle of the night, screaming, saying, "Don won't let me sleep. He keeps tickling my toes." This sent chills down my spine, and so my son would sleep in bed with me every night. This continued for another 6 months, until the real estate agent notified us that the owner of the house had died, and his children would be selling the property and splitting the profit between them, meaning we had to move. After we left, I came across a local news article about the owner of our old rental, stating how much he will be missed by the community. He had been raised by his mother in the house we were renting since he was a child. Then, I noticed his name, and everything came flooding back to me. His name was Don. My son's imaginary friend was our home owner. He must have been waiting for his mother to come and take him to the other side. I'll never look at imaginary friends the same. This is something that happened to me a couple years back that still freaks me out when I think about it. To start with, this was around midnight, and I was in my room browsing stuff on my phone when I suddenly hear what sounds like knocking outside my ground-level bedroom window. I first shrugged it off as being a squirrel or something, until I heard the same sounds again, which is when I started becoming concerned. It was at this point that I left my room and called my dad to tell him about what was happening. He tried to reassure me it was nothing, and while this was happening, I heard even more knocking coming from around the front door. I tried calling out to see if it was my brother or anything, but I didn't get any answers. At this point, I was starting to really freak out. It was after this that I heard someone at my back door trying to force the door open. It was locked, thankfully, and finally, after this, my dog finally caught on and started barking like crazy at the other end of the door, which finally drove whoever was out there off. After that happened, I called my grandpa, who lived a block over, to come and pick me up because I was way too scared to be able to stay the night in that house. In retrospect, I should have called the police, but I wasn't thinking straight, and I was shivering on the couch holding a kitchen knife the whole time I was waiting. I still have no idea who was out there that night. I had taken a walk alone in a nature trail earlier that day, and my only working theory is that someone had followed me home. I later learned that there were drifters living in the woods around that era. This was probably the scariest experience I've been through, and it still makes it hard for me to stay home alone at night. This is a true story. My grandma's house was built over an old city dump, which was cleared out and built over in the 1970s. God only knows what kind of supernatural energy they stirred up, ripping this place apart. Her house never felt right. You would always feel watched even when you knew you were alone. Random stuff would appear out of nowhere. I have always wanted to take a metal detector and run through a yard with it. You would see shadows in the corner of your eye, all the time. Stuff would vanish, move, and then appear months later, when you knew that nobody had touched it. When I was around the age of 5, I met my imaginary friend by the name of Billy. Why I put that in air quotes is because I don't think he is imaginary. Billy is a bright little boy. He looked to be around the age of 8 or 9. I think he is from the 1950s. He wears a yellow checkered shirt with a pair of blue overalls. His brown hair was always slicked neatly to the side of his face, and he has blue eyes with freckles. He kinda looks like a young Sheldon. The reason why I don't think he is imaginary is because, 1, he only lived at my grandparents' house. 2, my sister saw him too, even though I had never mentioned Billy to her. 3, I saw him until I cut contact with my grandmother at the age of 12 due to her narcissistic behavior. Billy would tell me that he was going to marry me when I grew up. He would hold my hand, kiss me, and play with my hair. He even gave me a ring that I still own. Whenever I would mention Billy to my parents or my grandparents, they would tell me that I was imagining things. Billy and I would always play together. His favorite game was hide and seek, but Billy would play dolls with me as well. He would play anything I asked. As I got older, I would normally just talk to him. Sometimes we would play games, but it wasn't as often as it was when I was younger. Of course, Billy didn't age. Despite me growing older than him, he still was focused on marrying me. When I would ask him where his parents were, he wouldn't say anything. He would often just look at his shoes or tell me he didn't want to talk about it. In fact, he would do the same thing whenever I would ask him about anything involving his family or home life. I once asked him why he was here. He told me he died in a brutal way and that he couldn't move on. He didn't tell me anything more. When I asked him how he died, once again he stared at his shoes and he told me he didn't want to discuss it, so I left it alone. The last time I saw Billy, he told me that he wasn't going to see me for a long time and that he might visit me in my dreams. Fast forward 2 years later to last night. I saw Billy in my dreams. He gave me a hug, told me how much he missed me, and told me that I had gotten bigger. We had a conversation that I cannot remember. He finally told me that his dad had killed him and disposed of his body in the old city dump that was cleared out to make room for the construction of my grandparents' house and the surrounding neighborhood. This is the story of 3 disturbing encounters with the same man. Let's not make it 4. I was 15 years old at the time and out to a weekend afternoon movie with my friend. We were really early, so we decided to take a look around a nearby toy store to kill some time before the previews began. I was strolling absent-mindedly down the aisle by myself, looking at toys I felt far too old for, when I heard an odd whistle. If you've ever heard the iPhone notification chime, then you have an idea of the sound I heard. I thought nothing of it. Maybe it was someone's phone and moved through the aisles, eventually meeting back up with my friend. We walked around a bit more, talking and laughing, and I heard that whistle once again. Being preoccupied with my conversation more than anything, I still didn't pay it any mind. On our way out of the store, I heard the whistle for a 3rd time, but much closer, practically right over my shoulder, and I whipped around mid-sentence. A man stood there, grinning from ear to ear in a strangely sinister way. The smile didn't fully reach his eyes. He was a bit on the small side, scraggly with long hair tied back in a low ponytail. He had on a tattered black t-shirt, which hung loosely off his thin frame, and a bulging black drawstring backpack.
"Hi,"
he said, stretching his lips even wider around his contrastingly bright white teeth. As a teenage girl, I was no stranger to the attention of older men, but something about his persona and approach set me on edge. Still, I was taught to be polite. "Hi," I responded tentatively, taking a step backwards and away from his intense stare.
"I've noticed you around the store and thought I could get your opinion on something."
He unfurls a crumpled, stained copy of the toy store's weekly ad and pointedly stabs at the Barbie doll selection with his index finger.
"See, I'm looking for the perfect doll for my niece, and I just have no idea which one to pick. What do you think?"
He looks up and smiles, but his eyes are dark pools of nothingness, devoid of any real interest. "This one's nice," I say, pointing to a doll at random, hardly looking at the ad.
"Wow, thank you. I really appreciate that. Hey, has anyone ever told you how pretty you are? You must go to the gym often. What gym do you go to?"
Taken aback by his abrupt stream of rehearsed-sounding pickup lines, I say thank you and force a laugh. I'm young, and so is my friend. Our inexperience and his strange approach keeps us frozen in place. His eyes bore only into mine, and his grin, wider, still deeply disconcerting, never fades from his face.
"Hey, do you want to be friends? I'd like very much to be friends with you. You know what friends do. They take pictures together. Let's take a picture together, since we're friends."
He holds up a red flip phone with the front cover held together by a rubber band. He activates the front-facing camera, and before I can say anything, he leans into me, face uncomfortably close, and snaps the picture. He looks at it briefly, smiles, and pockets his phone.
"There now, we're friends,"
he says, matter-of-factly, and turns his gaze back to me, appraisingly. Stupidly, in a horrified daze, I nod.
"So, where are you from? Where are you going after this? What do you like to do?"
My friend puts her hand on my arm, and I suddenly break from my stupor. "We have to go. My dad's waiting," I say, and we turn to go. My last, but not final, glimpse of him is with his head cocked to the side and that wide smile spread across his face. His eyes now flicker with something I can only recall as amusement. We turn our backs, and as soon as we get far enough away, we run. Fast forward to a year and a half later. I'm in my junior year of high school and on the early morning city bus headed to my first class of the day. The bus is packed, and I squeeze my way on the back, reaching out a hand to grab the pole as the bus brakes sharply. I hear a whistle close to my ear. When I hear it again, I adjust my earbuds in my ears. Why isn't that person answering their phone? A hand closes right above mine on the pole. It is too close and our fingers brush, but the person holds their hand there almost intentionally. I move my hand and glance up and into the broad smile of the creepy man from the toy store. Cold chills shoot down my spine, and I grip the pole even harder until my knuckles turn white. He tilts his head, still smiling his toothy grin, and says,
"Hi, friend."
The bus is so jam-packed that there's nowhere else for me to go, so I turn my body as far away from him as possible, hoping that playing dumb would work in my favor and he would go away. He leans closer still and says,
"Hi, do you remember me?"
I shake my head no and lean as far away as I can in the tight space. He frowns and looks suddenly angry.
"No, I know you. We met before. We're friends."
I shake my head again, looking down, pretending to be engrossed in my music player. Maybe if he didn't get a full look at my face, he might think he had me confused with someone else.
No, I have your picture,
he says, and reaches into his drawstring bag, pulling out his red flip phone, held together by frayed rubber bands. All the while, I'm thinking, if he sees me get off at the stop at my school, he'll know where I am every day and can easily find me. But if I get off at a random stop before my school, he could get off with me, and I have no idea where else to go. He's still scrolling through his phone, and I'm imagining all the other girls' pictures he might have on there when he asks,
"So, what school do you go to?"
I think about saying mind your own business, but remember his angry frown from before and give him the name of another school. It doesn't really make sense because the bus only goes past one high school and not the other one I told him, but he nods at this and says,
"Hold on, I have your picture here somewhere. We're friends."
The bus pulls up to my high school and there's nothing else I can do but get off. While he's still preoccupied with his phone, I lose myself in the crowd and run all the way to school. I'm shivering when I get to my first period classroom, and I can hear the blood rushing in my ears. I ask my boyfriend to take the bus with me every morning for the next few weeks, and I change my route going to and from, but I don't see him again until 2 years later, and I'm a sophomore in college. I'm taking the bus home alone after a late night out with friends when I hear a weird whistle. Enough time has passed that I don't feel much alarm and exit the bus at my stop. It is completely dark out, and I'm one of 2 people who get off. Then, from behind me, I hear,
"Hello there. Do you remember me?"
I turn around, and it's him again. It's hard to make out his features in the dark, but I instantly remember the tone of his voice, recall the whistle, the tilted head, and the wide-toothed smile. I see what looks like a backpack strapped to the front of his chest. "No," I say, and I start walking faster, heart racing, wondering how fast I can run in these flip-flops. I hear him picking up speed behind me, and I dare to glance back. I glimpse him starting to run at me, his hands in his backpack, digging around for something that I don't want to know. He's angry now, smile gone, and he shouts at me,
"So, you want to be that way?"
I start running and don't stop until I get home. So, to the whistling man with the backpack, no, I do not want to be your friend. Let's not meet again. I live in Florida, and this incident happened about 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma, so not that long ago. Back in July, the ex and I had just finalized the divorce, and I moved into a gated neighborhood where every house was rented out by the same rental company/landlords. It's a very small neighborhood with about 15 houses tops. All 15 houses are bordered around a man-made lake, with the backyards facing the lake. No one really has a fenced backyard. When you walk out your back door, you see the lake in front of you and your neighbors' backyards on each side of you. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed very close. Someone was always hosting a family-friendly party barbecue or having people over to watch sports. I am still depressed about my divorce, so I never partook in these social gatherings. The only person I got to know was my next-door neighbor, Steve, an active Navy soldier with a huge love for guns. Steve is the true hero of this nightmare. My daughter Alice is 4 years old, and I get her every weekend. Alice's bedroom window faces the backyard towards the lake. I spoil that girl to death. She truly is my everything, and I count down the days to the weekend every week just to be with her. That's why I was upset when Irma came and I had to go almost 3 weekends without seeing her. The weekend before the storm, she was with her mom. Then, obviously, the weekend of the storm, she was with her mom. Then, on top of that, the weekend after, she had to be with her mom because my power was still out. No AC in Florida is miserable. The humidity was so bad that week that I slept in my daughter's room the whole week because she has the only room with a window that faced the lake. I opened the window, exposing just the window screen, so the wind from the lake could cool the room as much as possible while I slept. Eventually, the power comes back and Alice starts visiting me again like normal. That was when the nightmares started. My daughter would complain about the singing lady and how she doesn't like her anymore. I thought maybe she was referring to one of my ex's friends, or one of the teachers at her school. Maybe there was a teacher at her school that sang to the kids that she didn't like. That Saturday night, Alice woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder. I ran into her room and turned on the light, and found her hiding under her covers. I asked her what was wrong, and all she could do was point to an empty corner of her room and say, "Look, look!" There was nothing there. She was acting as if she saw a ghost. After I calmed her down, she started to talk about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Daddy. Make her go away." Obviously, she is having nightmares, right? I showed her that there was nothing in the closet, and nothing under the bed, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. She calmed down and went back to sleep. I went back to my room and quickly fell back asleep. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before Alice comes running back into my room, screaming, "She's back! She's back!" Alice absolutely refused to go back to her room, so I let her sleep with me. The next morning, Sunday morning, I took Alice out to breakfast and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I haven't used one since her mom and I were still married, but I wanted to easily be able to hear her if and when she started having these nightmares again, so I could respond quicker. After I set them up, I showed Alice how they worked to give her assurance that I could hear her and she was safe. That night, she slept soundly and didn't make a peep all night. The following weekend, Alice had to stay with her mother again because she caught a stomach virus from one of her little friends at school. It was Saturday night and I was sound asleep in my bed. Around 2 a.m. is when I heard it. A woman's voice humming a soft nursery rhyme through the baby monitor. The humming and soft singing got louder and clearer as the voice got closer to the monitor. I wasn't dreaming. I could hear a woman softly singing lullabies in my daughter's bedroom. I had never been so scared and dumbfounded in my life. I was feeling a mixture of pure terror and disbelief. Then the voice spoke out.
"Alice, sweetie, are you awake?"
Adrenaline shot through my veins. I jumped out of bed and locked my door. I picked up my cell phone and called Steve from next door. He didn't waste a second. As soon as I got off the phone with him, I heard him storm out of his back door, screaming,
Don't you fucking move.
I ran outside and found him aiming his shotgun at a woman crouched outside my daughter's window, the one that I had left open after Irma and never closed. Steve quickly dropped his guard when he recognized the woman. It was Jean, the neighborhood maintenance man/woman. Steve's wife came running out after him and confirmed it was her. Jean played dumb, said she was not singing, and didn't even know my daughter's name. She said she was near my daughter's window because she was doing her weekly patrol for gators and thought she saw one approach our house from the lake. Bull fucking shit. This bitch was singing, and she called out to my daughter by name. Yes, it's true that there have been a few gator spottings around the neighborhood. And yes, part of Jean's job was to patrol the lake at night every now and then. But at 2 a.m., I obviously knew it was bullshit And even though neither Steve nor his wife called her out on it, I could tell from the look on their faces that they didn't believe her either. The next morning, I went over to Steve's house to thank him and tell him exactly what happened. He told me that Jean and her husband have been known to be a little cuckoo, but this is by far the craziest thing that has happened so far. Steve helped me install metal bars on Alice's window that afternoon. A bit of context first. My cat likes to go outside every day. In the morning, he follows us to the door, takes the elevator down with us, and then goes about his day outside until we bring him back home again in the evening. Now, my cat isn't the most punctual guy, so it's pretty common for him to stay out much later in the neighborhood, sometimes well into the night or for several days. Or he gets bored and doesn't play for more than 2 hours and wants to come back inside. The problem is that we're not home, so he just has to wait. My family and I live in an apartment on the first floor, so my cat's solution is to sit on one of the balconies and meow at the top of his lungs to get our attention. When we're home, it works perfectly fine, but when we're not, it's a lot less effective. So, our solution was to gently ask our neighbors that have the key to our apartment to bring him up so he doesn't have to wait outside all day. Those that don't have the key sometimes let him into the building so he's not literally outside. For example, when it's raining. Our apartment is a bit special because it's bigger than the others, so to get inside there are 2 ways when you get to the main hall. 1. Take the stairs to the left and open the door that has 2 locks. And 2. Use the elevator with the special key that goes directly inside our apartment, and the door only has 1 lock. The cat is used to the second option, and me too because we're both lazy. But when the neighbors that don't have the key let him inside the building, he goes up the stairs and waits. Since I usually use the elevator from the parking 2 floors below, that means I don't see him waiting in the hall, and he meows outside my door to get me to open up for him, or my mom, or my dad. All around we have our habits with my parents and neighbors, and it works fairly well. Now you know how everything goes with my little guy. Anyways, here's what happened a while ago. My parents like the outdoors very much, so I'm usually left alone in the weekends. Generally, it means taking care of the chores and inviting my friends over so we can have the apartment to ourselves, which is pretty nice. This time, I was alone. It was late, 11 p.m.-ish, and I was just chilling in the living room before hearing meowing over the sound of the TV. Someone let my cat in the building, and he's waiting outside the door. I took my keys and started opening the first lock. I don't know about other pet owners, but I know my cat's meow by heart. It's a kind of rising meow that's very high-pitched and very cute, and that also has a specific rhythm, because I've been hearing it nearly every day for 5 years. So I stopped. The noise isn't what it usually is. It's too deep and just off. This isn't my cat outside my door, and he's the only cat around that knows that he has to wait by the door and scream to be let in. By that point, I had stopped halfway through opening the door and waited to hear him again and noticed scratching. My cat never scratches. At that point, I'm super weirded out by the situation, but the meowing is getting super loud, and I didn't want my neighbors to be woken up, so I continued with my key, but suddenly, I heard another noise that freaked me out. A cough. For the record, I am not a very cautious person, and in my whole 21 years of living in this apartment, I must have looked through the peephole a total of maybe 5 times, but a small part of my brain told me to do it that night, and thank God I did. I let go of my keys and put my eye against the door, and saw it. A man standing there, fucking meowing in front of my door. To say that I was terrified is really an understatement, but my heart stopped. I just stood there petrified for what felt like an hour. I don't really know how long it took for me to move again, but eventually my body just took over, I guess. I did what you'd expect, ran for my phone, stood in the corner of the living room, and called the police. By the time they came, there was nobody in front of the door. I can't even remember when the meowing stopped, and they just took my testimony before telling me to be cautious and left. To this day, I still don't know what that meowing guy wanted. I'm not sure that I want to, anyway. I also don't know how he got inside the building, since you needed a key to access it, and how he knew that I would open the door if he imitated my cat in front of it. At least I will be careful from now on. And my cat eventually came back since then. He's sleeping in my bed as I'm writing this. Many years ago, before kids, rescue animals, a mortgage, and a husband, I was a travel writer in Europe. I did most of my trips alone. This story is about the first time I visited Prague. I'd never been to Prague, and the trip was last minute, so I had little time to prepare. My travel partner had dumped me in another country, and I was determined to make the best out of the trip by visiting a place I'd never been. Upon arrival at the train station, I visited the accommodation office and asked for a hostel not far from the center. In my early 20s, winging it was part of the fun. These days, I'm far less adventurous. The hostel they sent me to was a sprawling, crumbling, slate-gray Art Deco building on a nondescript street about a 10-minute walk to the Stair Mesto. The inside was probably beautiful at one time, but by the time I checked in, it was full of shabby, mismatched furniture and cheap, stained carpet. Most of the light fixtures were broken, leaving everything but the lobby dark and gloomy. It smelled of standing water and dust. I found my room, a double, for $12 a night, and made note of the fact that I had a roommate. She wasn't there, but on her side of the room there was a suitcase, a dress neatly folded across the back of a plastic chair, a scattering of makeup containers on the beat-up desk, and a stack of German fashion magazines on the bed. As I had no plans or goals on this impromptu trip, I spent the afternoon exploring Old Town Square, the Jewish Quarter, and Wenceslas Square. I purchased some Czech crystals for my mom and painted eggs from a street vendor for myself. I also made reservations for a sunset dinner cruise for one. At around 6 p.m., I returned to my room to shower, change clothes, and unload my purchases. When I left my room about an hour later, there was no indication that my roommate had returned at any point during the day. After the cruise, I stopped at a tiny bar on Tanksa and had a glass of wine. I'd heard horror stories about the dangers of Prague, but I felt no more trepidation than I did in any other large city. Sure, the cobblestone streets, fog rolling off the Vltava, backlit Gothic architecture, and winding alleys made me think of Jack the Ripper and Dracula, but in a good way. It was nearly midnight when I had returned to my hostel, so I was surprised to find that my roommate still hadn't returned. That wasn't uncommon, though. Backpackers are a fickle lot. She could have gone on a short overnight trip and just left her stuff behind, hooked up with a guy or girl, and was holed up at their place, or hanging out at another hostel. So I was surprised, but not concerned. I took another shower before bed, however, and was surprised to find that things in the room had changed in my return. Her bed was neatly turned down, the magazines had moved to the nightstand, and the dress was gone. The strangest thing, though, was the addition of a pink silky nightgown spread across the bed. My bed. Maybe she thought she still had the room to herself. I didn't see how. My shopping bags, clothes, and toiletries were in plain view. I gently moved her nightgown over to her bed and then settled in for the night, as I wrote in my journal. I assumed she was in the shower or somewhere nearby, so I expected her to return shortly. After about an hour, though, her side was still empty. I needed to use the restroom before I went to sleep, so I made one last trip down the hall. The building was unusually quiet. There wasn't the regular sounds of chatty backpackers, the clinking glasses, or the music that would normally leak through the walls. There was nothing. It was hushed like a church after the congregation had left. I found myself practically tiptoeing back. My room was near the end of the hall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the corridor was darker than before. The few working lights were blinking as they struggled to stay lit, and it reminded me of a funhouse. A tightness began to fill in my stomach, and I subconsciously quickened my steps. There wasn't a soul behind me, yet I kept glancing over my back shoulder, convinced I'd see someone gaining momentum on me. The only sound was the soft thud of my flip-flops as they struck my soles. I was flooded with relief as I flung open my door, but it didn't last long. Everything was exactly as I left it, except the silky nightgown, which was now back on my bed. Sleep came in fits and starts. I left the lamp on for a while, still convinced my roommate would be right back, but the shadows it cast made the room even spookier. It was too dark with the light off. I'd finally slipped into a deep sleep when I suddenly heard the door open. A man stood in the darkened doorway, showing just enough for me to see his contorted face.
I need to. You have to help me.
He sobbed, too confused and disoriented to be scared. I sat up, scrubbed my eyes, and reached for the lamp switch. But once the room was lit, I saw that the door was closed. There was no man. I quickly bounded off the bed and went for the door. It was locked. Nobody could have entered without a key, and the hallway empty. I passed the rest of the night fully clothed, sitting up in bed, and with the light on. Though I paid for 2 more nights, at 7 a.m. I gathered all of my stuff and went down to the reception desk to check out. "By the way," I said to the 20-something receptionist, "my roommate never returned. I'm a bit concerned." She picked up the room key, looked at it hard, frowned, and then glanced at her computer. "What room were you in again?" When I repeated it to her, she looked back at her screen. "Ma'am, that room's been empty for 3 weeks, and it's been cleaned since then. We only have 6 people in the entire building." The hostel has since been renovated and is now a luxury hotel. I realized that we didn't physically meet, but I thought it relevant since I seemed to have met someone. Someone entered and left my room. This is by far the scariest, most bizarre situation I've ever been in, and after lurking for so long, I just have to share it. My boyfriend Dan and I had just started renting an apartment together, and money was tight. It was 2001, and we were both in our early 20s. I couldn't find a job and relied on word of mouth to earn some cash wherever I could. I love to clean and organize, so I gave friends and family the go-ahead to give out my name and number to anyone who could use my help over the summer. Dan, his brother, and Dad all did carpentry work and also got their work through word of mouth. None of them had too many exciting stories to tell, other than doing work in a hoarder's home, or odd requests as far as cabinet design or placement. Dan got a call from an elderly woman, wondering if he could come by and give her an estimate on finishing her kitchen. She said that her husband had died before he could install the cabinets and countertop that he purchased, and someone from her church gave her his number. He said absolutely and offered to come out the next day. She objected and said, "This needs to be done now. That's why I called. They said that you could help me. What am I supposed to do? I'm an old woman. I live alone. My husband died." Dan was a pretty chill guy and kept calm, explaining that I had his car and wouldn't be home from running errands for a couple of hours, and by then it would be too dark for him to come out. Let me also note that although Dan has a soft, not very masculine voice, he was a big guy, about 6'4" and muscular. The old lady perked up and asked, "Will she be coming along tomorrow?" in the sweetest voice. Dan said, looking back, this should have been a red flag by the tone in her voice, and the fact that she was so adamant about him coming right at that moment. But as soon as she heard that he had a girlfriend, she changed her tune and got excitement in her voice, asking about the next day like it was no problem for her to wait. He didn't see anything weird about it at the time, and felt bad for her because he thought she must have been lonely and wanting some company to talk to. The next day, we both head out to her house. We brought along a small bouquet of flowers that we got at the grocery store to give to her. I figured she would enjoy chatting while Dan checked out her kitchen, and maybe I could come back with Dan and help her with other things around the house while he worked if she needed. Her township was about 45 minutes away, but I was excited to go because this township is known to have really awesome old houses and mansions. There are other normal subdivisions, depending on which direction you drive. My friends and I back in high school used to drive there just to cruise around and look at the neat houses. When we pulled up to the old lady's house, I was eager to go inside because it was such a cute-looking house from the outside, very fairy tale-ish, gray with white trim, with vines climbing up the side of the house. It was a shotgun-style house, so it looked tiny from the front. The small lawn was overgrown and messy, but I thought it added a charm to the home. We knock on the door and are greeted by a tiny elderly woman, shorter than me, and I'm 5 foot. She had on a dirty nightgown and even dirtier slippers. She looked past Dan and smiled widely at me while reaching her bony hands out to grab my face. I hold up the flowers to deflect and say, "Dan wanted to bring you some flowers." She lost her smile, grabbed the flowers, and said, "Kitchen's through here." She turned around to lead us, revealing a brown stain on the back of her nightgown. Dan and I look at each other, and he makes a goofy, grossed-out face. I make a judgmental face back and swat his arm as if to say, "Be nice, she's an old woman." We walk through a dark living room, nothing really out of the ordinary other than the smell, which was like cigarettes, mold, and body odor. We enter the kitchen. There's a closed door about 10 to 12 feet ahead, leading to rooms further back in the house. There's a man sitting shirtless at the kitchen table in the corner. He was hairy and overweight, with greasy hair down to his shoulders. The old lady said, "This is my son, Marcus." He was probably in his late 30s, early 40s. He said nothing but stood up and took his bowl to the sink. Great. Marcus has no pants on. Just dirty, and I mean crazy dirty, tighty-whities with several holes around the waistband. I shoot Dan the same grossed out look that he shot me earlier. He jokingly shoots me back a judgmental look and swats my arm. I give him a no, seriously, I'm creeped out look, and he nods to acknowledge it. So, what cabinets are you? Dan tried to ask, but was interrupted with Marcus pointing to the flowers and asking the old lady,
Where are those from?
She points to Dan, and Marcus snatches the flowers out of her hand, throws them into an open trash bag sitting on the floor, and walks out of the kitchen into the living room we just walked through. He just lost his dad, so I assume he had some sort of mental disability and was being sensitive to another dude showing his mom attention. So, where are the cabinets and the countertops you need installed? Dan asked the old woman. I thought you were bringing them, she huffed out, sounding shocked that he would even ask. I'm sorry. I thought you said that your husband bought them and you needed them installed, Dan said, confused and a bit nervous at how the woman is reacting. So you brought nothing? What is it you do? What is it you're going to try to sell me? She gets closer to Dan as she's throwing her hands up in disbelief and anger. Marcus comes quickly stomping in at the sound of his mother's distress. Rushing in from the other door past the kitchen was another man, around the same age. Wonderful. This guy is in his underwear, too. Fucking dirty, tighty-whities. This woman told Dan on the phone that she lived alone. This new guy freezes just past the doorway and just stares at me, standing feet away. Marcus rushes forward and stands between us and his mother and pushes her out toward the living room. Both doors are blocked by the fucking tighty-whitey twins. Dan scoops me behind him in an attempt to block me from both guys. We gotta be heading out now, he said calmly, hoping not to escalate things. We hear the old lady squawk out loud from the living room. Marcus doesn't move. I'll see what I can do about the cabinets, Dan says, as we inch forward. Marcus barely inches forward, but still blocks the way. I frantically tug on Dan's arm to get him to look over at the other guy, now with his hand down his dirty underwear rag, masturbating. That's when my calm, chill boyfriend loses it. I've never heard him scream like this. He remembers growing up. His older brothers taught him how to deal with bullies. Say some crazy, messed up shit to them, and they'll be too stunned to react. Dan screams with rage, veins popping, spit flying. Marcus looked surprised as he rushed past us towards his brother. We both thought that he was going to attack Dan, so he instinctively threw up his fist to defend himself. Marcus pushes his brother into the other room and slams the door behind them. Dan and I hurry out of the house. I think the old lady was sitting in the dark in the living room, but I didn't stop to look around as we were scurrying out. We called the cops when we got home. Didn't have cell phones back then, but nothing really came of it because they didn't really do anything wrong. He didn't expose himself. They didn't try to attack us. They agreed it was bizarre, but nothing they can do about it. We asked around, but nobody really knew who these people were, so we're not sure how she got our number. I don't know if they were just mentally ill, if she lied on purpose to get us over there, or why things happened the way they did. It was just scary as shit, feeling boxed in and not knowing what these creepy, almost naked dudes were thinking. Ever since then, I tend to avoid going inside other people's houses, unless I really know them. I recently received a friend request that reminded me of this story, so I'm going to share it here. This happened after I went to university, so I was 18. I made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus and ended up with a few groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend and plenty of people from my classes that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd have lunch with because I got on fine with most people from class, and we were all trying to make an effort to be social. So, when one girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to eat lunch together after class, I didn't have any reason not to go. We talked about school and that kind of thing, nothing noteworthy, but she did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week. It became a pattern, and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine, but it did mean that I lost the chance to eat lunch with anyone else on those days. In hindsight, I suppose that was the point. One day in class, I asked someone if I could add them on social media. This happened right in front of Lily. I saw her face jerk towards me from a couple of seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore, and I still remember it. By the time I got home later that day, Lily had sent me a friend request. No friends in common. Don't know how she knew my last name. I was a bit surprised, but I guess she just dug through the university's social media pages and found me through there. It gave me a bad feeling, but surely it was fine. She ended up messaging me a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself that she was just awkward, and we became friends, if not close. I'd known worse people. She still always got me to go eat lunch with her after our one shared class. Other than that, we rarely spent time together in person. I saw her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her. So, it was mostly online messaging and seeing each other in group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also called Lily. This was something that clearly bothered Lily, not my girlfriend, who couldn't have found it less interesting. It's a common name. She occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name or joked about her not suiting it. She clearly didn't like my girlfriend at all, and I had an idea of why. It was hard to ignore by this point. Lily was starting to unsubtly hint that she had a crush on me. I tried not to address it because what was I going to say? I've never known what to do when a friend makes a pass at me. I was also not interested in the least, even ignoring the weird stuff she pulled. Lily was not my type. She tended to dress and act in a way somewhere between a 50s housewife and one of those adults who is still obsessed with Disney princesses, if you can picture that. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, Lily asked if I'd go on a walk with her. Again, I didn't exactly know how to refuse, so I said, all right. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland. Lily led me into the woods, and the sounds of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log, and I joined her. She started talking about how she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed almost on the verge of tears. I think I tried to make an excuse about having plans with my girlfriend, but before I could leave, Lily chose to kiss me without warning. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. I got out of there and was happy to think that I wouldn't see her for a while. I came back to university after the summer, moving into a house with my friends. Without going off topic, There were some serious issues in my friend group. A lot of petty arguing and worse. I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of the school year as well, and basically the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily because it suddenly didn't seem as bad. That said, I didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly talked online. She was still constantly messaging me, after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear the news. I think she hoped to sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. There wasn't a big gap between my breakup and my new relationship, so she must have thought that she'd missed her chance to be with me. This is where the story gets bad. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talked about my life and mostly reblogged photos and stuff. I was on there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrase I recognized. It took a second to register that it was taken from my About page. That made me freeze. I read the message properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who would write it. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book they were trying to study. The reply was basically, "I don't know, sorry." But the important thing was that the question hadn't been anonymous. It linked to somebody's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know who had taken such a bizarre interest in me. As far as I knew, no one in real life, other than my boyfriend, knew about my page. Well, no prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was like a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over that thing. It was this cutesy pink and red page. There were a few posts about her interests, but most of the content was focused on her primary interest, me. Most of the posts were about me. There were accounts of things I'd done recently. He told me about such and such. He went to a nightclub recently, etc., as well as references to things from as far back as I'd known her. It was clear she'd been keeping tabs on me, both online and off, gathering up every scrap of information she could about my life and hoarding it here in her collection. She talked about us eating lunch together and how special our dates had been to her, as if it was anything more than acquaintances getting food after class. She talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods, but she wrote it as if it had been mutual. She quoted lyrics from my favorite song and talked about how she'd always been there for me, no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is, which answered another mystery about an anonymous love letter I'd received earlier that year with the same wording. It got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend as well. They weren't so nice. They got vicious, talking about how he didn't deserve me. He didn't know what he had. If she was with me, she'd be jealous of anyone who came near me. So my boyfriend, not being a jealous person, meant that he didn't love me. It was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think about the sort of person who could write so obsessively, being fixated on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was the blog that also made plenty of references to Lily's best friend, Steven. She had never mentioned this person to me. Her post talked a lot about Steven and how great of a friend he was, and how much fun they had together, how he looked out for her, etc. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and captioned it with, "Steven sent this to me. He knew I'd like it, and I love it." The problem was, the photo was taken from my own page. I hadn't sent it to her. She took it from my page and then claimed this fictional best friend of hers shared it with her, because in her head, she'd split me into two people. In her messed up fantasy life, I was both the perfect best friend who was always looking out for her, and her soulmate who was bound to end up with her when I finally got over my sweet and kind boyfriend and all the other easy girls I hung out with that she made dozens of posts complaining about. Who was she complaining to? Oh, Lily had an audience. She asked open questions about me and her relationship with me, and got messages back from her followers. People who took what she said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with this stalker that my boyfriend didn't deserve me, and we were bound to break up soon, so I could be with Lily, the person I was clearly supposed to be with. She had this fake fan fiction version of my life up for anyone to share their opinion on, and she'd made herself out to be the hero of it all. I went maybe a month back into this page's history. I did not look at everything that was there. It was too much, so I'm not sure how long this had been going on. I sent Lily a message confronting her about the blog. She said nothing, and I cannot stress how weird it was to have found pages and pages dedicated to me, with her talking about how she was in love with me and would make sure we ended up together, slamming my boyfriend and building a fantasy life with two different versions of me in it that she clearly believed to be real, then acting like it hadn't happened. She said nothing. She didn't address it. She just changed the subject, even after I pushed, and it was like she hadn't even registered what I said. I've never seen anything like it. She deleted the page, of course, or at least changed the name and hid it so I never found it again. It wasn't the end, though. I wasn't going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in classes, and she had started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm kind of a paranoid person. Knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me for who knows how long freaked me out. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. It was an absolutely useless attempt that only made him uncomfortable. He told me about it right away. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated and wait for me to break up with him? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work out for her, she tried hitting on 3 of my other friends. None of them took the bait. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages while they were together, letting me know that she'd rather be with me. No thanks. Lily made sure to stay in my life the whole time I was at university. There was a time when I tried to pull away from her, and she ended up starting rumors about me and damaging career opportunities that I'd put a lot of work into. I don't know what else she did behind my back, but it made me realize it was safer to let her think that she was a part of my life while ignoring her, rather than doing something that would cause her to get angry. After I graduated, Lily still wanted to spend time together, but I knew I didn't have to now. I made excuses about work and barely talked to her at that point. I almost entirely stopped posting on social media that I knew she knew about. Of course, she didn't give up that easily. She tried to start conversations, asked me to meet up with her, attempts I usually ignored. I didn't like to think that she was still tracking me online, but she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd occasionally reference things I mentioned online somewhere she shouldn't have known about. The last time we had a real conversation, she sent me a message out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken at all in months, and we hadn't talked about anything serious in much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation still makes my skin crawl, but I'll summarize what happened. At first, she asked me some questions about how long that I'd known I was queer. I told her some basic stuff, the kind of thing I'd tell anyone who asked. Then, she changed the subject. She started talking about how would I feel about her if she was a boy, about wanting to be a boy for me. The messages quickly became fetishistic. She went into plenty of detail about fantasies she had of the two of us. Again, we were not friends at this point. We'd never been especially close, at least not from my perspective, and we had barely spoken for years. I can't imagine sending messages like that to even a close friend, let alone someone who barely knows you. I tried telling her not to pull this crap with me, but she decided to change tactics. She sent photos of herself, followed by a bunch of messages, maybe 4 or 5 a minute, way too fast for me to reply before the next one would arrive, basically quoting back what I told her about myself and my past earlier. She was telling me these things as if they had happened to her. She was role-playing as me. The worst part was that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things actually happened to her, even when she was quoting me word for word. Things I told her only hours before were now her life. It was like she was trying to absorb my history, to take it over, to make my life part of her. Yeah, I didn't talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made to talk to me, and I even silently deleted her from the inactive social media, which was her only real way of contacting me. I really thought she might finally move on. A few days ago, she sent me a friend request. It's sitting in the unanswered, because I know if I delete it, she'll only send me another one. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago. This story is just the highlights, and even then, it's only the stuff I know about for sure. A lot happened behind my back. I know it did. So, girl who spent 12 years obsessing over me, fetishizing me, stalking me, and harassing me. Let's not meet again. The fantasy life you built for the two of us in your head is the only place you'll be seeing me anytime soon. So, it was a Saturday night, and I, of course, was home alone. To preface, in front of the sink, there's a window that gives you a decent view of the backyard. I wasn't really paying attention at this point, just finishing up rinsing off my fork before jolting. I'm not sure why exactly, but I felt my joints and muscles, I don't know how to describe it, lock up, stiffen. In either case, I just couldn't move. Then, there it was, a set of tapping at the window. Keep in mind, I was staring at my fork, and just my fork. The thought of looking away didn't occur to me until I heard my mom's voice from the other side.
Hey, Lily Flower.
For context, Lily Flower is just a nickname only my mom has ever called me, which is what unsettled me. I knew for a fact no one else was home. There was more tapping.
Hey, Lily Flower. I think there's someone in the shed. Come look. Lily. Lily Flower. Come outside, please. I'm scared. Lily, come outside for me, please. Lily.
Get out here. Now.
remember what it said after that. I just snapped and ran to my room. I didn't tell anyone about this, and honestly, I don't plan to. Knowing my family, it'll just become a joke to them to tease me with. I just needed to put this out there. Not sure if this is some sort of sign of mental illness, or whatever. I recently came across this sub, and oh boy, do I have a story that fits. For context, this happened 20 years ago, just after Christmas. I had turned 6 a month prior. My cousin decided to take us out to the city, which was 10 minutes from where we lived. We took the bus, walked around the city in an incredibly unsafe neighborhood, with basically another child responsible for us, and after a few hours, got tired and decided to go home. The city had a central area for buses, not a bus station, but like a huge, perfectly square field with some plants and flowers and bushes. Lining all 4 sides along the streets were a couple bus stops and benches, so basically, you could catch several different buses from that area, going all over the county and city. Since it was just after Christmas, the bushes along the field were still covered in Christmas lights. As we waited for the bus, I began to wander away as I admired the lights, my cousin none the wiser. At some point, I heard a man say,
Hi.
I looked up from the bush and he was smiling down at me. Thinking back on it once I got older, it was clear to me that he was homeless and probably on drugs. He had longish brown hair that was wet, teeth that were black along the gums, and his clothes were incredibly dirty and torn, and he had several jackets on. None of this really registered in my 6-year-old brain, so I just smiled back up at him and said, Hi. He asked if I liked looking at the lights, and I said yes, they're pretty. He said, and I'll never forget this exact sentence.
If you like Christmas lights, I've got some really cool lights in my house you'll love. Wanna come see them?
I eagerly said yes, so he reached down his hand to me, and I took it. We started to walk away, and were headed to the corner of the field where a few big buildings were. He said his apartment was just a couple blocks away, so we were headed around the corner of the building, when my arm jerked backwards, and I turned to see my sister pulling me away from him. He didn't say a single word, just took off instantly, running. It took a few years for me to fully grasp the danger I was in. My sister and brother talked about what happened a lot, and how scary it was. When I finally got a little older, I appreciated how terrifying all that was, and how close I was to having my life change, or end, forever. If I had rounded that city corner with him, they never would have been able to find me in time, because they wouldn't have even known where to start looking before we disappeared around the corner and into the city. It's something we still bring up sometimes to this day. To that homeless man, let's not meet again. A few weeks ago, me, 23-year-old female, and a friend, 24-year-old female, planned to go to an event together. Since we only had free time after work, we decided to get an Uber so it wouldn't take too long to arrive, and we could enjoy it more. The first half of the ride was really normal, seemed like a normal, polite dude, but as soon as we got to the highway, his attitude changed. He seemed a lot more irritated. Me and my friend didn't pay much attention, though, and kept chatting between us. Our attention was drawn when he started shouting with another driver. He turned to us and said he was going to pull over. I tried objecting, but he ignored me and pulled over anyway. He reached out for the glove compartment and pulled a gun. Important to note that guns are illegal in my country. We were just watching this unfold with held breaths, and when the other guy drove away, we let out a sigh of relief. But then, we were still stuck in a car with a crazy man with a gun. After that, he went back to driving and apologized to us, saying that the guy was tailgating him. I let out an, "Oh, got it." He kept talking.
That guy is lucky you two girls were here, or else I would have followed him and shot him right in the face. Sleazy idiot.
I look over to my friend. She's in shock and paralyzed. I'm in shock too, but trying to keep my cool, because the last thing I want to do is get him annoyed at us. If he was willing to shoot that guy for tailgating, I didn't want to know what he would do to us if I said the wrong thing. "No, it's okay. I understand," I say, trying to appease him.
These guys need to be taught a lesson.
He continued while I just agreed with my head.
I did that before, you know. You just trap the guy in an empty street, and when he leaves his car, bang!
Did he just admit to murder? Was the only thing running through my mind, but I managed to keep calm and just agreed with him for the rest of the way. He did deliver us to the right place with no more incidents. I waited a few weeks to report, since he had my home address and wouldn't be too hard to figure out who reported him. Nobody showed up to my house with a gun, at least until now, and Uber has answered my report saying that they'd started an investigation. I hope this guy doesn't do this to anyone else. I live in a medium-sized apartment building in a fairly major city. While the neighborhood I live in is more on the safe side, gun violence is very high in my city as a whole, and we have a big trafficking problem. Despite this, I feel pretty safe going out, especially close to my apartment building, where it is mostly well lit, and I'm friendly with a few of the regular homeless people. Last night, I got a reminder that my safety isn't guaranteed, and I've been pretty shaken since. Last night at around 12:20 a.m., I asked my partner if he wanted to share a joint with me, and when he declined, I locked the apartment and went downstairs myself. The exit I take spits me out on a main street where there is an occasional car driving by at this time. Usually, this type of human presence comforts me walking late at night, but tonight, a lone black/dark blue van approached in my peripheral and started to drive slowly, matching my walking pace until I rounded the corner and the van was stopped by a stoplight. I found it very strange at the time, but the van was on the other side of the street, and there were 1 to 2 other cars, so I brushed it off. Around the corner, there is a little food truck area with a bunch of picnic tables. They have like Christmas string lights hung up and a few other ambient lights that are kept on the whole night, but it barely illuminates the area. As I'm walking past the picnic tables, I notice a large man dressed in dark clothing sitting alone at one of the back tables. He was wearing a hood or a hat, so I couldn't see his whole face, but his eyes followed me as I walked the border of the picnic area. My usual smoke spot is behind a fence on the other side of the picnic area. I was a little shaken by spotting that man, and also, I didn't want to upset him by smoking near him, so I chose a slightly further spot against the side of a construction vehicle. I lit my joint and started puffing away and reading something on my phone. I soon start getting this really uneasy sensation. It felt like all my hairs were standing up, and I got the most intense goosebumps I've ever felt. My phone was still playing music, and I turned it off, and as I turned it off, I heard the shifting and rustling of gravel on the ground behind me. I swung my head around and saw a man reaching towards me with huge hands. I caught only a glimpse of his face before I fell to the ground. His eyes were wide, bulging, and extremely dark. They terrified me. My mouth was agape, and he was basically snarling at me. He scared me so bad I fell to the ground, stumbled, and broke into a run, all in like 1 second. I ran for a few seconds before I peeked behind my shoulder and saw him a couple yards behind me. At this point, I saw it was definitely the man who was sitting at the picnic table, and now I saw that he was wearing what looked like a dirty bucket hat. He had shoulder-length, dirty light-colored hair and was way taller than me, so at least 6 foot. He was definitely gaining on me, as I had lost ground by turning around, and I am not in the best shape to begin with. I was about to reach the first entrance to the building, but the issue was, 1, there were double doors at the entrance that closed quite slowly, and 2, the only way up was an elevator. So, if he got inside with me, I was SOL. I kept running, taking my chances with my running ability versus quickly opening doors ability. I kept running along the other side of the building to get to the second entrance to the building. This one is just 2 single doors, which open to the stairwell up to my apartment. It's above the 2nd floor. That's all I'll say because I'm still scared. As I'm nearing this entrance, I see another man who appears to be speedwalking directly towards me from the opposite direction. I should note that throughout this, I have been hearing the growling, snarling of the first guy behind me, and as the second man gets closer, I hear he is also growling. I reach the keypad, unlock the first door, and quickly slam it closed behind me until I hear it lock and click again. The second man reaches the door first, and I saw his face more clearly as it slammed against the glass window of the door. He was also tall with longer hair, and I remember he was wearing overalls, but I mostly remember his wild eyes and his teeth that gnashed at me right before I turned away, opened the second door, and booked it up the stairs. I didn't even stop until I was in my apartment, had all the doors locked, and was under the covers. I think in retrospect, I didn't hear any of the signs of them following me up the stairs, but I was so convinced that they were on my tail. I think the only reason I got away from them was that they didn't know about the side entrance to my building, so they didn't expect me to keep running past the first entrance. I got up to get my inhaler. I was having a near asthma attack at this point, and peeked out of the window. My heart sank. I saw the same van that had creeped me out earlier parked across the street from the entrance to my building. The entrance is like right below my apartment window. I then looked down to see 3 men pacing along the side of the building, including the 2 that had chased me. I ducked down fearing that they would see me. A few minutes later, they start shining flashlights into the windows of the apartments. At first, I think of course it's only my apartment, but after a while, it's clear that they're just searching for me. At this point, I try to call my building manager to let him know about the situation, and he sent out a text alert to all of our building list. I was so paranoid another innocent person would be accosted by them, so I called the police. They told me they were on their way and to stay out of the window in case they were armed. A few minutes later, the men were spooked by a faraway police siren and got in the van and peeled away. I think it was a different 911 call, because when the officers arrived to our building, the sirens weren't on. I spent a long, sleepless night thinking they'd come back, but never did. Definitely going to be avoiding being alone at night from now on. I asked one of the homeless guys I am friendly with if he saw anything suspicious last night, but he said that he hadn't. They couldn't have been residents because they didn't leave after management had sent that alert to us. The part that sticks with me the most is the growling and intense look in both of their eyes. I don't know if they were on drugs or what. They never said any words to me or each other. Haven't heard any updates from the cops, but it's only been a few hours, and they didn't seem that interested in my statement, as the van had disappeared when they left. To the two men who growled at me and chased me into my apartment, let's not meet again.